Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Megan Schargorodski, and I'm the manager of the Kentucky Mesonet. I will be moderating the webinar today. First up, we have Dr. Stuart Foster with the Kentucky Climate Center and Kentucky Mesonet, who will be presenting the monthly climate perspective on drought and hydrologic conditions. And later on, we will have Matt Dixon from the UK Ag Weather Center, who will be talking a little bit about the agricultural impacts. So with that, I am going to pass it on to Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate the introduction and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We moved things up a day with the 4th of July holiday falling on a Thursday, and apologize for any inconvenience for folks since we changed things up a little bit this time and included a registration step in the process. So kind of summarize how things look out there now here in early July. Megan, if you'd advance me to the next slide. Okay. Again, this webinar series is presented by the Kentucky Climate Center here at Western Kentucky University in partnership with the National Integrated Drought Information System and in coordination with the Midwest Drought Early Warning System. This webinar reflects the contributions of many partners across the state, and we certainly appreciate all of the input. Our next webinar will be on August 1st, so as soon as we flip the calendar, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, and we'll be recording this webinar and making that available. Also, along that line, want to apologize that last month we had a glitch in our effort to record, and so we do not have a recording of last month's. So hopefully we'll be back on track here today. So looking at the outline, again, we'll look at recent conditions, looking at temperature, precip, soil conditions, stream flow, drought, which is non-existent in the state at this point, but we'll look not just at Kentucky, but we'll look at a national perspective on that too. Impacts associated with weather and climate over the last month, and then move into outlooks looking ahead over the next week to 2 weeks, the month of July, and then a little bit longer out for a seasonal perspective. Then we'll summarize what we've talked about and have an opportunity to entertain any questions or discuss any issues you'd like to address. So the past 30 days in terms of precipitation, again, the webinar title says drought and hydrologic conditions, so it's focused quite a bit on the amount of water that's been entering our state over the last 30-day period. Here's a map that shows the National Weather Service radar estimated precipitation totals along with an overlay of actual measured values at Kentucky Mesonet stations across the state. And again, as last month, you can see the drainage basin boundaries shown in dark black or bold black lines on the map. So you take a look at that and immediately drawn to the central portion of the state where we had numerous stations that reported 10 inches or more of precipitation, and nearly all across the state had values that were above normal. The only exceptions, a couple stations over in the Jackson Purchase area in far western Kentucky, in an area that had been wetter than just about any other part of the state in the first few months of the year. So extraordinarily wet conditions throughout much of Kentucky during the month of June. And then broadening that out to a 60-day perspective, you can see the 60-day totals ranging from close to 9 inches to 10 inches in far western Kentucky. Some values down around 7.5 inches there as you come back to Trigg and Christian County. And then again, picking up over much of the central part of the state in the Bluegrass region and the east, where we're looking at 60-day totals that are above 10 inches, approaching or exceeding 15 inches in some places. So again, extremely wet period here in the state. And we'll go on to look at a 90-day map, and we see that we just keep adding to the total. And now we're looking at basically June, going back to May, and getting most of April. And you can see the effect of the last 30 days combined with the pattern of above normal precipitation that we had seen along the Ohio River and of course across into southern Indiana and Illinois. So areas that are approaching 25 inches of precipitation during that period, and in a few spotty cases even higher than that. We've got a 28 plus inches of precipitation measured in Adair County during that period. So everywhere across the state, plenty of precipitation. Now, if we take those maps, bring them together and look at them as a not total precipitation, but as a percent of normal precipitation. Take a look in the upper left, and that's this last 30-day period. And you've got a lot of blues and shades of purple. That blue area is anywhere from 150 to 200% of normal precipitation. And the purples run from 200 to 300, and then from 300 to 400% of normal precipitation. Again, very remarkable values, and spread almost all across the state, with the exception of the Jackson Purchase area, where you've got some yellows and a little bit of tan. And looking at the scaling there, those areas are roughly somewhere between 75% to 100% of normal. So a little bit below, but not very much, and occurring in the context of a wet start to the year. If we go back to the 60 and 90-day percent of normal precipitation, both of those maps look remarkably similar. Again, you can see areas along the Ohio River, basically from around Owensboro up to Covington and beyond, where you've got the blue shading for the 90-day, and that's 150 to 200% of normal. And then across much of the central and eastern part of the state, areas that are 110 to 150% of normal. And then otherwise, the driest areas of the state have been basically very close to normal precipitation for that period. You may recall, though, that last month when we were on the call, we were talking about emerging dryness that had been developing. So that really got eliminated here over this last 30-day period. Okay. A set of graphs that we've added, and I'll give Megan some credit for putting these together. Again, selected 4 stations representing different parts of the state and kind of capturing some of the variability of the precipitation pattern. The story is a little different in each one, and yet there's a common theme, and again, that theme is that it's been pretty wet. So let me explain what we're looking at with these graphs, and we'll focus on the one in the upper left for Meade County, our station there southwest of Brandenburg. The gray line is the accumulated precipitation averaged over the time span that Mesonet station has been there. For Meade County, that goes back to 2011. So that gray line it's not the climate normal. It's not based on 30 years. It's based on 8 years of observations. And again, the line goes up because we're just adding to the total precipitation for the year. And so you can see that 8-year average. It's a pretty short period, but nonetheless, it gives us some context. And then the blue line that lies above the average was last year. That's 2018, which again was a very wet year. And you can see that looking at 2018, one thing I'd like for you to consider on that graph and the others is that if you look at the present time, right about the beginning of July into August, you can see that that blue line started to separate from the average, going well above. So we had a wet second half of 2018, and then we followed that up with a very wet first half of 2018. So there you can see total precipitation through July 1st of 38.9 inches. The 8-year average would have had us right around 30 inches. If you can kind of scan and look at some of those others, the station in the upper right from Morgan County, so that's over in northeastern Kentucky. And again, it's not as far above normal, 27.4, but we are a couple inches above the average, in that case, an average for a 10-year period from 2009 to 2018. In the lower left, Fulton County, again, far western Kentucky on the Mississippi River. Very wet conditions this year, over 40 inches of precipitation already. And the average there, based on 2009 to 2018, is for the yearly total be just about 51 inches. So we're already 80% of the way there, halfway through the year. If you were to take the precipitation total from the 1st of July of last year through the 1st of July this year, that 12-month period, you're looking at about 70 inches of precipitation over that 12-month period. And Fulton County is not the only place in Kentucky where we come up with a total that is somewhere in that 65 to 70 inch range. Otherwise, you can see the same graph there for Clinton County, central part of the state, but down there on the Tennessee border. So we're spread out a little bit. Again, a pretty similar pattern no matter where you look. Okay, shifting to temperature, we've got a couple maps from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. On the left, we're looking at the average maximum temperature and looking at the departure from average, or departure from the mean, over the 1981 to 2010 period. So there you can see for the average daily maximum temperature, Kentucky has been anywhere from right around normal to about 2 degrees, or maybe a little over 2 degrees colder than normal in terms of the daily high temperature. May not feel that way out there, certainly not the last few days, but high temperatures have actually been a little bit depressed. If we look at the right-hand map, we're looking at the average minimum temperature, and there we see values that are anywhere from around normal to about a degree or two above normal in terms of the lows. And that's patterned there to where the range between the lows and the highs is a little compressed. It was certainly consistent with a wet weather pattern that we've been seeing. So we have more cloudy weather, we have more moisture in the environment, in the soil, more evapotranspiration, and when that happens, we tend to have higher dew points. Our low temperatures don't drop as much, and likewise our high temperatures don't rise as much as they would if conditions in the atmosphere and the soil were drier. Okay, a couple products that we looked at last time that are basically giving us an indication of soil moisture, groundwater across the country. And you can look at Kentucky, but you can look at that within the context of the U.S. And you can see again very wet conditions here in Kentucky and in much of the country. And later on, we'll take a look at the U.S. Drought Monitor map. Take a close look at what you've got in front of you here. When we see that map, you'll see the correlation or relationship between what this is saying and what the Drought Monitor is telling us. Okay. And then another product, the Evaporative Demand Drought Index for the U.S. Again, nothing exceptional going on in Kentucky. at this point. Some soil moisture graphs. We put some of these on the first couple of webinars, and I selected 3 of the 4 stations that we had last time. I could have put the other one on there, but really wanted to highlight, and it shows up particularly well with Simpson County and LaRue County. So again, Simpson County down on the southern border with Tennessee, just south of Bowling Green, and LaRue County up in the central part of the state, close to Elizabethtown, a little bit south of Louisville. And you can see that if we go back 30 days or so, again, the last webinar, we were concerned about emerging dryness starting to appear in part of the state, and you could see soil moisture being depleted, as is common this time of year as temperatures warm up. But again, over the last period here, 30 days or so, with all the rain, soil moisture has rebounded to levels that would be much more characteristic of early spring. So not something you would expect here in July in Kentucky. Moving on from precipitation and soil conditions to stream flows, here's the USGS stream flow 7-day average map for Kentucky. You see a lot of blues, shades of blues, greens in there. Far eastern Kentucky, the greens are indicating streams at near normal flows, but otherwise, as you get into the Kentucky River, Licking River Basin, certainly across the Salt and Green River, a lot of streams that are running above normal to much above normal, especially given this time of year. So it's something that would make us more prone to the possibility of flooding, but again, something that's not as vulnerable to that this time of year as we might be at other times. But you can see that there's some elevated risk given those current stream flow levels. And now we'll go on and take a look at the 28-day average, and again, dominated by the area of the state that is much above normal for this time of year in terms of stream flow, reflecting all that precipitation we've had here in the state. Current flooding conditions, however, really not reporting any flooding, river flooding at this time here in the state, with the exception of the kind of ongoing high water conditions on the Mississippi and lower Ohio, with all the portions of the basin that have drained into that area. So conditions over on the Mississippi have been problematic for quite some time this year, and for farmers that have land in low-lying areas has been problematic for them. But otherwise, over the large portion of Kentucky, no flooding to be reported at this time. Now we'll look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, released a little bit early with the 4th of July holiday coming up. And the pattern here is similar to what we've seen and remarkable in the lack of drought almost anywhere across the country. And again, a kind of a record situation in terms of the lack of drought. This is giving current conditions. You've got some short-term drought in the southeast, and a little bit of D0 abnormally dry in western Tennessee. That's not too far from the Kentucky border. We'll talk a little bit more about that on this next slide, where we're looking at how that pattern has changed over the last month. So now we're looking at basically the drought monitor map that we just saw, and subtract from that the drought monitor map from 4 weeks ago, and look at the changes that have occurred. So for Kentucky, again, we had a 1-class improvement. We had portions of the state that had been moved into D0, abnormally dry, and that was eliminated very, very quickly. You can see the improvement over much of the southeast. There were some questions earlier about the development, kind of monitoring that situation in the Southeast. We frequently in Kentucky see drought move, encroach from the south into Kentucky, so keep an eye on that. But there has been improvement of anywhere from 1 to 2, as many as 3 classes in terms of drought status in the Southeast. So that looks promising. Again, the only little bit of yellow in our area is that small region in western Tennessee where it started to get dry, and we'll keep an eye on that. Again, we saw that in the Jackson Purchase region of Kentucky, that was the one area that really didn't get too much rain compared to other parts of the state here over the last 30 days. And this is basically just a placeholder now, so we can skip right by the drought map for Kentucky. Chip Zimmer, he can take vacation right now, I guess. Okay, go ahead, Megan. Yeah. Storm reports. In contrast to the last slide, this one's extremely busy. Pulled the storm reports, National Weather Service storm reports, and they're collected from the Iowa Environmental Mesonet. They have a great website and data access tool to be able to download these. So you take a look at the map, and the immediate message is, gee, there was a lot going on over the last 30 days, all sorts of symbols there. The most dominant ones related to thunderstorm wind damage and thunderstorm wind gusts. And then you also see a lot of symbols for floods and flash floods, as well as hail, heavy rain, tornadoes. So just a few bullets there. Again, numerous reports of heavy rain on many different dates and flash flooding. Unfortunately, we had a fatality in Spencer County related to vehicle and trying to cross an area where there's water over the road. Tragic situation. Would like to like people to refrain from that. What turn around, don't drown. Tornadoes had tornadoes on multiple days in the latter part of June. No significant damage, some minor property damage, no injuries, loss of life reported with any of those. There were reports of hail on multiple dates in eastern part of the state on a couple different days early in the month, and then later in the month, some more significant hail in the western counties of the state with largest hail size report of around 3 inches or so in Ballard County, and then some smaller but significant hail sizes in the Ohio and Marshall counties that can certainly do some damage. And then there's also a report of an individual on Murray State University's campus in Callaway County being struck by lightning and taken to the hospital. I do not have any further information as to whether that person was treated and released or what the situation was there. So that's a summary of storm reports. And now, Megan, I'm going to send it back to you, and we can go to Matt Dixon there at the University of Kentucky Ag Weather Center, and he's on top of the agricultural world and can fill us in a bit.
Hey guys, can you hear me? I think so. Thanks, Stu. All in all, we're looking pretty good on the ag side here in June. There's no major concerns for a second straight month. With that said, we have been getting in the upper 80s to low 90s this past week on a daily basis. This can cause dryness to set in fairly easily on the ag side. I talked to a couple extension agents in Western Kentucky recently, Fulton County and Webster County. They both mentioned they were still good on moisture. Sure, there may be some sand pockets drying out here and there, but overall, corn and beans are looking pretty good. On top of that, Ben Rudy, he's the agent in Fulton County. He mentioned something that I can 100% agree with, and that is we are always 2 weeks from a drought this time of year. Agricultural drought, that is, that short-term drought. meaning everything is progressing well in the counties right now, but I might call Ben back next week and they don't have much rain, and he may say they're turning dry, but by that second week, they'd be in a full-fledged drought with these 80, 90-degree temperatures. So bottom line, it doesn't take long with this kind of heat. As we sit here and talk, hay and winter wheat harvest continues and is followed by double crop beans going in the ground. Wheat harvest and beans plant are both slightly behind that 5-year average. You can see that chart at the bottom of your screen. 87% of beans are in the ground, which also takes into account that double crop, slightly behind that 5-year average of 94%. Compared to the rest of June, farmers finally got a window over the last week of the month to get in the fields. Data at the Ag Weather Center, once again, takes into account measurement data and data coming in from airports, shows that the state averaged 7.70 inches for the month of June. Normal is 4.25. 7.7 is not official, but that kind of number would place Kentucky in top 5 wettest Junes on record, data going back to 1895. So quite the wet month, but it did dry out that last week of June. Let us get in the fields a little bit. The crop report released this past Monday on the 1st mentioned some low-lying fields flood, soybeans rotting in the ground before emerging, and over maturity of the hay due to that prolonged wet spell. With hay, you really want 4 solid days of nice dry weather with sunny skies, and we really didn't get that until the last week of the month. Many were trying to finish up the first cut this past week, even continuing into this week, but some will be starting that second cut now. Now we are in that summer-like pattern where you get those pop-up storms during the afternoon hours. So now you're really rolling the dice whether when you cut hay, whether you're going to get hit with some rain. Looking at crop conditions, much of Kentucky agriculture remains in that fair, good, excellent categories, just like June. There are small percentages in the very poor categories, saying that you can see 23% corn is now going into the silking stage. This is the start of the reproductive stage in corn development, and it's considered to be the most sensitive period for stress, with plenty of water or moisture needed. I've seen some stats that corn need around 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch each day during pollination during this time. So if you don't get that moisture, we're looking at kernels aborting. Secondly, kind of go on top of that, there is some concern moving forward on getting dry, period. Talking with Chad Lee, he's a grain specialist here with the UK. With all the rain we had this past spring, the root system on corn, it never properly developed and extended down to deeper depths. It's more or less constricted. He mentioned that if we get dry this year, we'll be in trouble. In an interview with Lex 18, he said that we are looking at 20 to 30% yield loss if we become drier like we typically do during the months of July and August. Irrigation is getting prepared for dry weather, but some just simply don't have it. Same concerns were coming from the other county agents I was talking with across Western Kentucky. Now, I know last month I was talking about Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, you know, how wet it's been. They were well behind the 5-year averages, record-breaking for Indiana, I saw, for getting corn in the ground. The dry weather has helped out. Many acres of corn will still go unplanted this year, and if it does go in the ground, it'll be used for silage. Some soybeans are getting replanted up north due to just flooding in the lower areas, but percentages are still lagging similar to Kentucky in relation to that 5-year average. I think the biggest difference between us and those states to our north is the crop condition. While we have very little in that very poor to poor category condition-wise, those states are more or less in that 20 to 30% range. That seems more common up north. So another big difference is crop development. A lot of farmers were late getting in the field. while around here in Lexington, I see corn that's shoulder high. Some farmers I know in southeastern Illinois have corn that is less than a foot out of the ground. So well behind, and mainly because a lot of farmers up north didn't get their corn in the ground until later that first week of June, even into that second week. So well behind. Now I want to close. We've been talking about all the rain, moisture, and whatnot, but this 90-degree heat it is becoming a concern for livestock. It's a case every year, but we have something called the Livestock Heat Stress Index in the Ag Weather Center. Basically tells us when conditions are stressful on livestock out there. But it did go in the danger category this past week on a daily basis during the afternoon and evening hours. That's continuing into this week. We tell farmers, or it's more ideal to work cattle earlier in the morning to avoid that stress, transporting them during that time too. Make sure the cattle have access to shade and plenty of clean water. But yeah, so livestock heat stress is becoming an issue now. But that's what I got on the ag side. I know it's a lot, but I'm going to send it back to Stu at this point.
Hey, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that very detailed report. And Megan, we'll go ahead and continue then and start looking ahead. We'll start with the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast for the Weather Prediction Center. If you can focus in on the state of Kentucky there, you can see some different shades of blue, a little bit of green, and if you boil that down, it basically suggests that over the next 7-day period, we're expecting about a normal amount of rainfall for this time of year here in Kentucky, generally around an inch plus or minus a little bit for that 7-day period. A lot more moisture to our east and the southeast, the areas where the drought improvement's been occurring, and then on out in the upper Midwest and Great Plains, and take note of that because that's a continuation of a pattern of very wet conditions and cooler conditions in that part of the country that's expected to continue. 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day precipitation outlooks. Over the short term, 6 to 10 days, we have a slightly enhanced probability of above normal precipitation. About 40% chance here for most of Kentucky, a little bit above that in far eastern Kentucky. So that means, again, about 40% chance of above normal, 33% chance of normal, and whatever's left over, about 27% thereabout chance of being below normal conditions there over the 6 to 10 day period. And then going out a little bit farther, extending that to 8 to 14 days, got a good bit of the country around us that's anticipating above normal precipitation, but not in a core area that's centered on Kentucky and surrounding areas. So again, suggests that there's an equal probability of being above, below, or near normal. No strong signal there for 8 to 14 days out. And then the monthly outlook for July initially, again, came out on June 16th, but was updated on the 30th of June as conditions, the predictability became a little clearer, I guess. And the pattern that we see there, again, is reflecting what we've been looking at for a while now. Likelihood of above normal precipitation in the central portion of the country and cooler temperatures in the central portion of the country. So we've got this trough kind of digging into the Midwest and the plains. For Kentucky, equal chances in terms of temperature. We're right in an area that's between the southeast, where they're expecting an enhanced likelihood of warmer than normal temperatures, and the area where we're expecting an enhanced likelihood of below normal temperatures. And then likewise on precipitation, you can see a correlation there. The warm areas likely to be drier. The wetter areas, or cooler areas, likely to be wetter over the month of July. And then looking out a little bit farther, if we take a look at the seasonal perspective for the 3-month period, July, August, and September, again, equal chances for us, no strong signal regarding temperatures. And if we look at Kentucky, and this is not for any particular place, but if we look statewide for Kentucky, then we're looking at temperatures for the month of July to be somewhere in the 75 to 77 degree average across the state, and for July precipitation probably in the 4 to 5 inch range. And then looking forward to the 3-month total, again, not as much variability in the summer as we would expect in the other parts of the year. We'll go on to the next slide. Stream flow, monthly stream flow projection from the Ohio River Forecast Center. And we see near or normal to above normal stream flows projected for the month. So again, we're starting at very high levels. If we get somewhere around normal precipitation, we expect that those high stream flow levels start to drift back down to more normal type of levels, maybe hanging in a little bit above normal. Flooding, nothing to look at on this slide. Areas where there's a 25% probability of flooding over the next 3 months. All green, no particular risk for our area. We do continue to see some minor risk in the northern portion of the Ohio River Basin there in Ohio, parts of Ohio, mainly Indiana and Illinois. And then the next slide looks at areas with a greater than 75% probability of flooding, and again, really the same story. So again, it's a time of year in the summertime where we don't anticipate a great deal of flood risk. Again, even with all the precipitation we've had certainly reports of flash flooding, but in terms of widespread river flooding, we just don't expect that this time of year. If we would have seen those same rainfall totals in November, December, January, February, so forth, it might have been a very, very different story. So to summarize, a few bullet points here. Wet period, a lot of heavy precipitation during the June period. Eliminated the D0, which had been slapped on portions of Kentucky. That went away in a hurry. Lots of storm reports across the state, and not with just one event, with numerous events and a variety of types of impacts documented throughout the state, from east to west, north to south. Third bullet, very short, but worth stating, and that is simply that we are in the midst of a remarkably wet period in Kentucky. If we go back and look at the record, going back to the late 1800s, it is just remarkably wet, and not only here in Kentucky. A return of dry weather and flash drought could significantly impact crops. Matt talked about that before, and I think that's worth emphasizing because we tend to pay attention to what's happened lately, and we see how wet it's been. And when we're looking out the fields, we don't see those root systems underneath the ground. So the awareness that the wet conditions have impacted how root systems have developed and has increased our vulnerability to a flash drought is something we need to be aware of. Now, whether those dry conditions develop or not, time will tell. And at this point, there are no strong signals hinting at extreme climatic conditions over the next season or month. Doesn't mean we couldn't have it as part of our natural variability, but there are no signals out there that are kind of hedging our bets one way or the other. So that gives us a summary of the last a month or so in terms of what we've experienced, what sort of impacts we've had, and an outlook for what may be headed our way. So I'd like to thank everyone on my team here that's helped to prepare information for the presentation. Give a shout out to Jennifer Van Antwerp, one of our student workers that is a whiz with geographic information systems and making maps. Does a great job. And Megan, likewise, in putting together some very informative precipitation graphs. And Matt Dixon there at the UK Ag Weather Center, we're excited to be partners with those folks there. They do a great job, and appreciate having Matt on the call. So Megan, I'll turn it back to you, and if we have any questions, maybe we can address them.
All right, at this time, we are going to open up the floor to any questions that you may have about what's been talked about. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll give a few minutes for you guys to ask. Additionally, if anyone has any comments from their specific sector, feel free to comment as well. All right, well, if there are no questions, I guess we will go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Our next regularly scheduled webinar is Thursday, August 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to call or email Dr. Foster at the contact information you see there. And if there's nothing else, thank you so much for participating, and we hope to see you next month.
Thank you.